On a quiet, peaceful street in a small suburban town in America, where winter always arrived early, with thin layers of snow blanketing the rooftops and streets, a small cafe called Morning Dew was a favorite stop for the locals. The cozy atmosphere, infused with the rich aroma of coffee and the inviting scent of freshly baked pastries, made it a beacon of warmth on chilly days. However, what made Morning Dew truly special wasn't just its menu, but the old wooden table by the window, where an elderly man with white hair could always be found. His name was Walter, and he was 82 years old. Every day, regardless of the weather, Walter would appear precisely at 7 a.m., walking slowly yet deliberately through the cafe's wooden door. In his hands were always a neatly folded newspaper and an old, worn notebook. The staff didn't even need to ask his order: a cup of black coffee with no sugar and a slice of crisp apple pie, his favorite for as long as anyone could remember. When Walter sat down, draping his thick wool coat over the back of his chair and opening his newspaper, he seemed like an inseparable part of the morning at Morning Dew. Everyone at the cafe was familiar with the sight: a well-dressed gentleman with a calm demeanor, quietly sitting but always ready to flash a warm smile at anyone who glanced his way. Walter didn't talk much, but his presence brought a peculiar sense of peace, as if he had weathered every storm life could throw at him, and was now savoring the simple moments left. Yet, few knew that behind his gentle smile lay a story of deep loneliness that had stretched on for over 20 years, ever since his beloved wife had passed away. Walter lived alone in a small wooden house that had once been a vibrant family home. The walls of the house still bore marks of time, like pencil lines measuring his children's heights as they grew year after year, or the faded photographs from when the family was still whole. But now, the house was empty, save for Walter and the memories of days long gone. His children had grown up, busy with their own lives and families, and could only manage a phone call on special holidays. But Walter held no resentment, understanding that life often pulled people in different directions. As long as they are healthy and happy, I am content, he often reassured himself. Despite his solitude, Walter maintained his routine. The wooden table at the cafe had become a place where he silently reflected on his thoughts, a sanctuary for unspoken memories and unexpressed longings. But this morning, something was different. Walter didn't bring his notebook or newspaper as usual. Instead, he sat quietly, his eyes gazing out of the window, watching the snow gently fall on the street. It seemed as though he was deep in thought, contemplating something important, a decision he kept entirely to himself. The regulars at the cafe had no idea that this morning, Walter had decided that it would be the last time he sat at his familiar wooden table. That morning was colder than usual, with snow blanketing the streets, rooftops, and trees in a soft white coat. The air was dense with the chill, and every breath formed a faint mist in the icy air. Inside Morning Dew, a cozy cafe, warmth from a small fireplace made it the perfect refuge on a freezing day. The gentle hum of customer chatter mixed with the whir of the coffee machine, creating a comforting ambiance. Yet, in a familiar corner of the cafe, at the wooden table near the window, Walter sat quietly, more subdued than usual. Walter had walked into the cafe wearing a thick coat and carrying his familiar cane. The young staff greeted him with friendly smiles, but they refrained from saying more, already accustomed to his quiet demeanor. Walter nodded back, making his way slowly to his usual table. As he settled in, a staff member brought him his regular order: a cup of black coffee with no sugar and a slice of apple pie, his long-standing favorite breakfast. However, something was different today. Walter didn't bring along his usual folded newspaper or his worn notebook where he often jotted down silent musings. Instead, he sat there, hands clasped together, gazing vaguely out the window as snow continued to fall. His eyes seemed to drift into a distant realm of memories. Beautiful moments he had once shared with his late wife. While Walter was lost in thought, the gentle chime of the cafe door opening broke the silence. A young woman stepped in, and her presence seemed to change the atmosphere in the room. She wore a striking red coat that stood out against the muted grays of winter outside. In her hands, she carried a small gift box, and her face, though radiant, held a quiet sadness in her eyes. She stood still for a moment, scanning the room as if searching for something. Her gaze stopped at the elderly man sitting by the window, and without hesitation, she walked toward him. "Excuse me, would you mind if I sat here?" she asked gently, her voice filled with warmth and sincerity. Walter looked up, slightly startled by the unexpected visitor. But then, drawn by her bright eyes and genuine smile, he smiled back and nodded. "Of course, young lady." She pulled out a chair and sat across from him. Introducing herself as Lily, she explained that she was a sociology student and often visited the cafe to work on her studies. "I've seen you sitting here many times, and I've been curious about your story," Lily said, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. Walter felt a twinge of shyness. He had grown used to his quiet routine, but something about Lily's warm presence and honest interest encouraged him to open up. After a brief pause, he began to speak. Walter shared with Lily the story of Mary, his beloved wife, whom he had cherished all his life. They had built a beautiful life together, raising their children and creating countless memories. "Mary was the light of my life," he said with a soft, wistful tone. "She had a way of making everything better. I'll never forget her smile, the way she looked at me. Those are things that time can never take away." But over 20 years ago, Mary passed away after a long battle with illness. Walter explained how he had tried to remain strong for their children, but since her departure, life had never felt complete. The house became so empty. No more laughter, no more long evenings talking over tea, Walter said, his voice tinged with sadness. "I started writing letters to her as a way to keep our love alive. But those letters, they're still in a drawer, never read." Lily listened intently, her own eyes welling up with tears. "Mr. Walter, your love story is so beautiful," she said softly. "But I think the most beautiful part is that you've kept that love alive in your heart, day after day." Walter gave a faint smile, but there was a hint of sorrow in it. "Perhaps that's true, but today I want to say goodbye to this place. You see, Lily, this morning I wrote the final letter to Mary, and I think it's time for me to go and meet her." Lily was stunned, her voice trembling as she asked, "Where are you going, Mr. Walter?" Walter placed a hand over his heart and replied gently, "I don't know, but I feel at peace." For a moment, Lily sat in silence, absorbing the mix of loss and peace in Walter's words. She didn't want him to leave in solitude. "Mr. Walter, I think your story deserves to be heard. You've carried it in your heart for so long. Please, let me listen a little more, won't you?" Walter looked at her, his gaze softening. He nodded, and they continued talking. He spoke about the letters he had written, letters filled with love left unsaid, sweet memories, and even apologies he wished Mary could understand. "The final letter I wrote today," he said, "simply tells her that I love her and thank her for being the most wonderful companion I could have ever asked for." Lily didn't interrupt, feeling the weight of his words. After a while, she reached into her bag and placed the small gift box on the table. "I don't know why, but this morning, I felt I should bring this with me. Now, I'd like to give it to you." Walter opened the box to find a bright red knitted scarf inside. "I made it myself," Lily explained with a shy smile. "I thought red might bring some warmth to your day." Walter was touched. He held the scarf, feeling its softness and the care woven into each stitch. "Thank you, young lady. You're very thoughtful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Perhaps I'll take it with me, so Mary knows that someone still cares about me." When their conversation came to an end, Lily sensed that Walter was ready, but she didn't want him to leave without leaving something behind for the world. "Mr. Walter, I think you should write down your stories. It's not just a way for Mary to know how much you love her, but also a way to inspire others." Walter looked at the young woman with eyes that seemed to glisten with newfound clarity. He nodded and smiled. "Thank you, Lily. Perhaps I'll do that," he said. Rising slowly, he wrapped the red scarf around his neck. Before leaving, he turned to Lily one last time, his gaze filled with gratitude. "Thank you for listening." Walter stepped out into the snow, his steps slow but steady. His heart, though still carrying its loneliness, now felt a little warmer. Lily, sitting at the wooden table, watched as his figure disappeared into the snowy streets. She silently promised herself that she would preserve his story, a story of love, loss, and unyielding resilience. Lily felt her heart ache. She couldn't let Walter leave feeling alone. A man who had lived his life with such profound love deserved someone to listen and cherish his story. She leaned in slightly, gently holding his hand, her eyes filled with determination. "Mr. Walter, have you ever shared your story with anyone? Your stories are so meaningful, and I believe they could inspire so many people." Walter shook his head, his gaze distant. "I don't think anyone would want to hear them, young lady," he replied softly. "I think differently, Mr. Walter," Lily said earnestly. "Stories like yours are exactly what this world needs. Stories about love, loss, and resilience. They remind people of how precious life is, even through its hardships. I could help you share them. But first, I'd like to invite you to breakfast, a special breakfast. Just you and me." Walter looked surprised at her unexpected offer, but then smiled warmly, a rare smile that brightened his aged face. "All right, young lady," he agreed, his voice trembling with emotion. The two stayed much longer than usual. In the cozy cafe, they talked deeply. Lily listened intently, not just with her ears, but with her heart. Walter shared more about the golden years he spent with his wife Mary. The winter mornings they sat by the fireplace and the quiet evenings filled with laughter. He spoke of the loneliness that followed her passing, of the letters he wrote but never sent, and of the love he kept alive in his heart. Lily, in turn, shared her struggles, moments when she felt lost, and how she found hope in the stories of others. Before they parted, Lily reached into her bag and placed a small gift box on the table. "I brought this with me this morning, not knowing why. Now I think it was meant for you," she said with a shy smile. Walter opened the box to find a bright red knitted scarf inside. He gently touched the soft threads, feeling the warmth and care woven into each stitch. "I made it myself," Lily explained. "I thought red would bring some warmth to your day. And I hope you'll always remember that there's someone out there who cares about you." Walter was deeply moved, unable to find words for a moment. His eyes glistened, and for the first time in years, his heart felt lighter. He looked at the young woman with deep affection, as if seeing a glimpse of Mary in her. "Young lady, you've been the light of this morning. Thank you truly," he said, his voice breaking. As they said their goodbyes, Lily watched Walter slowly walk out of the cafe, the red scarf wrapped around his neck, standing out vividly against the white snow. In her heart, she felt a surge of warmth and a powerful resolve. She would preserve Walter's story so no one else would have to face the kind of loneliness he had endured. Walter and Lily's story reminds us that sometimes even a small conversation can change someone's life. In today's fast-paced world, loneliness can easily creep into hearts, especially for the elderly. But a simple act of kindness, a moment of listening, or a heartfelt gesture, like Lily's gift to Walter, can bring light to their lives. If you're reading this, ask yourself, when was the last time I spent meaningful time with my grandparents, parents, or an elderly person in my life? Don't let them feel forgotten. Dedicate a morning, an hour, or even just a few minutes to listen, talk, and remind them of their importance. If you'd like to hear more inspiring stories like this one, click subscribe on Life Stories 365. Here, we don't just tell stories. We share valuable lessons that encourage you to cherish every moment in life. Don't forget to share this story to spread love and kindness to others. And if you have a story of your own, leave a comment. We'd love to hear it and share it with our community.